Ecclesiastes still. Again, this summer, we are very quickly going to Job, Ecclesiastes, and then the Song of Solomon. The whole idea is it's kind of just an overview, kind of like a flyover, to get the whole picture of what's going on. So I'd encourage you to do your reading. Of course, if you're doing the through the Bible reading, you're going to be reading through these sections anyway. So, but I actually think that it is good. For instance, when we did Job, it's very easy when you're reading Job to get bogged down in the particular chapter you're reading. But by covering these sections, it helps put the whole thing back into perspective. So when we come to Ecclesiastes, remember that most Bible scholars believe that Solomon wrote this. He was the king of Israel, the united Israel. He was the son of David, not the oldest son, but the son that God chose to be the king. When he became king, the Lord appeared to him in a dream and told him he could ask for anything he wanted. He asked for wisdom. God granted him great, great wisdom, plus riches and power and authority. And so many scholars believe that Israel was at its apex, its greatest power, greatest land, greatest wealth, everything during Solomon's reign. In fact, Scripture says that he was preeminent amongst all the kings of the earth. Many people believe that that means that Israel may have been the most powerful nation on earth in his day. Solomon, for all of his wisdom, unfortunately, didn't follow some of that wisdom. And I have nothing against women, but he married multiple wives, had multiple concubines, as you know, and they ended up leading him astray in some ways. So it was not a complete rejection of the Lord or his following, but definitely turned his heart in ways that he shouldn't have gone. So as Solomon is writing Ecclesiastes now, we need to remember that he's writing this from the perspective of what would life be like if you didn't love the Lord, if you didn't have the Lord in your life. So it's not necessarily that Solomon had become this sour and dour at life, but he had experienced a lot. And so he's trying to explain to us that a life apart from the Lord, you can have all the riches you want, and it's not going to satisfy you. You can have all the power you want. You can have all the wisdom you want. And so when we get into Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and 5 now especially, we're going to see a tremendous poem that Solomon wrote. And again, for those of you who were here a little bit earlier, Mark was playing a famous, what do they call it? Not a country song. Folk song that was written based on Ecclesiastes chapter 3. But anyway, it is a series of contrasts. But again, he's trying to show us that there is nothing new under the sun. Okay, this is a phrase that keeps repeating itself as you go through the book of Ecclesiastes, which means there are cycles. And as we talked in chapters 1 and 2, there are many different cycles that just seem to happen over and over again, no matter how long you live. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. The rain comes down, the streams go to the ocean, they turn into clouds, they come back, it rains, and you have that hydrological cycle. And you have all these different cycles in life, except if you're the governor of the state of Washington, who said that water is not a renewable resource. Therefore, our hydroelectric dams are not renewable. Anyway.
He's 1/4 science. She 1/4 science.
But anyway, so, but according to Solomon, it's one of those cycles of life. Yes. You're being waved at.
Yeah.
Just ignore Dan. He gets this way sometimes.
That's his house.
Now listen, I hobnob with important people.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So is she a hob or a knob?
I'm both.
Anyway, so what we need to do is start in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and read the first 8 verses, hopefully.
Chapter 3. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to rend, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time of war, and a time of peace.
So again, one of the other themes of Ecclesiastes is the teacher, and that's what Ecclesiastes really means. It's a teacher, somebody who's exposing things. Says vanity, vanity, or worthless, worthless. And again, that is basically the view of life. If that's all there is, if this is it, there used to be a beer commercial on TV. I'm not a beer drinker, I don't even remember the brand now, but it said something about living life to the gusto, okay? If this is all there is, you know, then live life to the full. But it turns out to be meaningless, empty, okay? But if you have a relationship with God, and if you're seeing life from an eternal perspective, it gives an entirely different view. So Solomon had already lamented that life was meaningless apart from God. He talked about this vicious cycle. And then he discovered that there is a season for every activity under heaven. Or another phrase that is very popular is under the sun. Under the sun. And again, basically, I think what that means, this is my personal interpretation, is that means life here on planet Earth. Because we live under the sun. Okay? Most of us do things during the daytime. And so life is under the sun. Life on planet Earth is this vicious cycle. So verses 2 through 8 list many of the activities that there are under heaven. There are 14 pairs of opposites. In Hebrew speech, meaning opposites together express totality. For the example, heaven and earth stands for all of physical and spiritual realities. Okay? So again, we're not only under the sun, we're also under heaven. And so this is basically a totality of everything that you can experience in life. So, the first of these pairs is what?
Born and die.
A time to be born and a time to die. The teacher opened his list of activities of life with the most momentous events of all, birth and death. And let's face it, unless the Lord comes back, and unless we are raptured, every single one of you here in this room has been born. In fact, we can ask Patty about the two ladies sitting next to her. She can testify, yes, they are indeed been born, okay? But the fact is, all of us eventually will die unless the Lord comes back. So that is a cycle that continues to repeat itself, but of opposites. All right, the next set of opposites is what?
Plant and uproot.
Okay, a time to plant and a time to uproot, and then it says a time to kill and a time to what?
Heal.
Heal. A time to tear down and
Build a
time to build. So these three lines of the poem address creative and destructive activities used for either establishing or undermining. Planting seeds and pulling weeds must be done to reap a harvest. The same is true of life. Some elements must be planted and others uprooted if one's life is to be complete and meaningful. Then on page 74 of your study guide, there's an entire column there about Israel planted and uprooted. Would somebody be willing to read that for us?
Bible commentator Matthew Henry suggested that Ecclesiastes 3:2 refers to God's dealing with the nation of Israel. First came the time when God planted the nation of Israel and Canaan. But in order to do that, he had to uproot those nations that already dwelt there. Otherwise, there would be no room for his chosen people. Eventually, there came a time when the Israelites too had to be uprooted. Because of their sinfulness and their disregard for their covenant with God, the people of Israel were taken into captivity by neighboring peoples. The prophet Jeremiah used the same imagery when he cited God's two-pronged decree. If at any time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be uprooted, torn down, and destroyed, and if that nation I warned repents of its evil, then I will repent and not inflict on it the disaster I had planned. And if at another time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be built and planted, and if it does evil in my sight and does not obey me, then I will reconsider the good I had intended to do for it.
So not only do we see this in life as individuals, but we see it in life of nations. And again, I realize there is a whole entire branch of Christianity that believes in what is called replacement theology. I do not adhere to that at all. I believe in 1948 you see this cycle repeating itself. They had been uprooted when they rejected their Messiah. In year 70 AD, as you know, Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Okay, the people were scattered to the four corners of the earth. But right now, they have become a nation again overnight, and they are returning. God is planting this nation. And of course, we're going to ask for prayer this morning as we talk about Israel. Many of you have heard about what happened yesterday. Israel was attacked from the north, from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, and one of their rockets went astray and landed in the middle of a Druze soccer game and killed 11, basically children or teenagers. These kids out there playing soccer. And so Israel blames Hezbollah 100%, because this was an entire barrage of rockets, but one went totally astray. And so today they attacked Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, and they believe this is going to be the start of a wider war now. Not only is Israel going to be at war in Gaza, but Israel's going to be at war in the north itself. It's interesting to me, again, when you think that Israel is land-wise about the size of the state of New Jersey, which is small. And at most they have around 8 million people, which includes Jews, Arabs, Druze, Christians. And yet there's over 120 million Arabs in vast land around them. And then you have the whole world. Why is it that the world hates Israel so much? And again, we talked about this a couple Sunday nights ago. That we did a video on how this is a spiritual battle that is taking place. So
Anyway, it's pretty obvious, because going clear back to Abraham, God said he would bless the world through this particular seed of Abraham. And ever since then, the devil has been going against that proclamation by God. We know the devil will ultimately lose, but in the meantime, what a mess.
when you think about it, everything that has happened against the Jew or against the nation of Israel ultimately was Satan's desire to destroy the Messiah. It has always failed. Okay? Right now, we believe in the second coming of Christ. The second coming of the Messiah. He has to come to the nation of Israel. He has to rule from Jerusalem. Well, if there's no Israel, he cannot come, can he? They've even blocked up the eastern gate and planted a Muslim cemetery in front of the gate so that the Messiah cannot come from the Mount of Olives and enter from the east. That's not going to stop him, believe me. That's not going to stop him.
The Muslim cemetery.
No. All right. So by saying there's a time to kill, Solomon was not condoning premeditated murder. His point was something more complex than this. Perhaps he was suggesting that we must wrestle for God's wisdom during times when we, too, are confronted with aggression. For instance, when is the right time to resist evil with forcefulness? On the other hand, when is it a time to seek reconciliation and healing? Many of you may have heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to the United States Congress this week. It was an extremely, extremely strong speech. And basically what he was saying is, there is a time when we must confront evil. And Hamas is evil. And it's not just their battle, it's our battle too. Because if they succeed in Israel, they're coming for us. They're the little Satan, we're the great Satan. And so I thought it was a very, very important speech. Okay. There are times when those who seek to fear and obey God need to tear down negative aspects of their personal lives, and times when they need to build up the positive aspects. So let's go down. What's the next set of oppositions or contradictions?
Weep and laugh.
A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. So the teacher covered the range of human emotions, both private and public. In these two lines of the poem, the Hebrew words translated weep and laugh indicate expressions of an individual's emotions, while the Hebrew words translated mourn and dance indicate expressions of a group's emotions. So that's interesting. There's both of these in our life. All right, going over to page 75, what's the next set of opposites?
Search.
Well, a time to scatter and a time to gather
Embrace and refrain.
and pray. Okay. So various interpretations of these two lines of the poem, which focused on friendship and enmity. In ancient times, fields taken by enemies were made unproductive by doing what? Scattering stones, yeah. I mean, if you want to plow your field, that's one of the things you want to do is get rid of stones. In fact, my father-in-law had a friend down the road, and one time when we were over there, he had this friend bring his machine into this field right by where their house was, and it was a rock picker machine. And this machine would go through just very lightly in the soil, but all the rocks that were near the top would tumble into this unit, and it would literally clear the field of rocks. So if you want to, well, in fact, there's another technique they used to use. Not only did they put rocks on the field, what else would they do? Salt, exactly. And you know the story of Tyre and Sidon, and apparently that's what the enemy did there. They actually salted the ground to make it sterile.
That's
So,
what the Romans did to Carthage too.
yeah. Yep. Because once the salt's in the ground, what are you going to do? You have to wait a long time. All right, so gathering stones, the opposite interpretation of gathering stones for use in building a wall to keep out invaders. When Trudy and I were first married, we moved back to New York, and I was going to seminary, and we lived in Rockland County. And the seminary and college was part of an old country club. And this country club had rock walls, and they were like 6 feet tall. And they went on and on and on and on and on, because back in those days, in order to clear the fields, there was so much rock in Rockland County. This is in the valley of the Hudson River. Our apartment overlooked the Hudson River, and so there's tons and tons of rock. So when you go to Israel, when Jesus made the triumphant entry into Jerusalem, and the people were crying out and singing Hosanna and praising the Lord, and the Pharisees got all upset and told Jesus, make your disciples stop. What did he say?
He's even the rocks.
That's right. And I thought, if you look around the valley, Kidron Valley, it is basically rock everywhere. And so it would have been a tremendous chorus singing his praises. So. All right. According to one interpretation, a time to embrace is a call for us to hold someone who is experiencing pain, grief, or reconciliation. And yet other times it is best for us to respect a person's privacy. A second, more literal interpretation places the teacher's advice in the context of love and its physical expression between a husband and wife. All right, so what's the next set of opposites? Right, a time to search and a time to give up. A time to what?
Throw away.
Have you ever done spring cleaning around your house? It's amazing the stuff that you accumulate, okay? And eventually there needs to be some throwing away. At least a portion of our lives consists of our concern for accumulating or getting rid of possessions. According to the teacher, God gives us special times when we must search out for things, friendships and goals, and hold on to them when we acquire them. But there are other times when we're called to give them up. The meaning and mending most likely refer to the ancient custom of tearing one's clothes in grief. If so, this line restates verse 4, in that it shows there's a time to express grief. Okay, what's the next set of opposites?
To tear and to mend.
All right, communication in our lives is a two-way street. And I think that if you've ever dealt with somebody who's going through a hard time, we need to learn that. There's times to give them advice, and there's times to just be quiet and listen. And so, all right, what's the next set of opposites?
Love and hate.
Now that sounds interesting, okay? Human life can hardly resemble what is supposed to be without affections. The teacher realized our lives will be marked with both love and hatred, and he encouraged his hearers to be careful about the times both are exercised. Centuries later, the Apostle Paul stressed that Christians should love what is good and hate what is evil. Many of our critics claim that we as evangelical Christians are haters, that we hate people. For instance, people who are different than us. And hopefully, if you are ever accused of that, your response should be, no, no, no. I do not hate the sinner. I may hate the sin, but I don't hate the sinner. We love them, and we want them to repent. We want them to get right with the Lord. We want to encourage them. And so, but there is definitely a time to hate evil.
And it seems like there's a time to hate people also in the Bible that tells us that God hates some people.
Yeah,
So
because
I think
they are
it's-
evil.
I think that's right. I think it's when they will not separate themselves from the evil, they become part of it.
Well, there is what is called the unpardonable sin, and many Christians get confused as to what that is. And my answer, if anybody ever contacts me and asks me what the unpardonable sin is, with the implication they're afraid they may have committed it, my answer is, if you're afraid that you've committed it, you haven't committed it. The unpardonable sin is the absolute total rejection of Christ, of the Holy Spirit, and no desire whatsoever to repent. Now, as far as us hating evil, I'm going to say a word about this in our worship service, but I hate what they did in the opening ceremonies of the Olympics in Paris, France.
I'm gonna speak to that one, go ahead.
What happened?
Well, I heard Pastor Jeffries from the Dallas Baptist Church on his TV last night, and he feels that what they did by these
Drag queens?
drag queens impersonating the Last Supper. And they had one who was garbed up and was supposed to be Jesus. It was based on that famous
Leonardo da
painting,
Vinci painting.
which we know really wasn't the correct way to serve.
Right.
But that doesn't matter. And he feels that at that point, most likely they have committed the unpardonable sin. And it's possible, if you say, you go that far and throw it in the face of God himself, he said, we could be offended, but who do you think is really offended? It's God in heaven himself. To mock my son who came and I sent to die for your sins in that position, you probably have crossed over the line. And that's Pastor Jeffries, but I tend to agree with him. I think they probably have.
So many Christians around the world have spoken against this. Again, Leonardo's painting is not accurate.
No.
Yet it portrays in his mind what was the Last Supper. And for many of us, the Last Supper, which became communion, the Lord's Supper, is absolutely vital to our Christian experience. And what they did mocked it in a very, very evil way. When they had drag queen members as the 12 disciples and a drag queen member as Jesus himself portraying this and just openly mocking Christianity. But this shows what is going on in the world today, what is going on in France today. And apparently the news media as a whole has lauded this. They think this is just great.
Did you know about what happened to Paris's power shortly after?
No, what happened?
They had a total Paris blackout. I don't know how long it lasted.
I know they had a rainstorm.
Yeah,
Oh my.
They had a blackout, total power
Well,
blackout.
great.
Yeah,
Great.
it's kind of like God says, okay, you want darkness? Here it is.
Well, unfortunately, our official representative of the United States government thought it was great.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Well, thank you.
I'm not supposed to mention who
Her
she
initials are
is.
KH.
She is
I'll say
related
it.
to the president by marriage. So, anyway, all right. So there is a time to love and a time to hate, and I know that's a hard statement to accept because we as believers believe that God is love, that we should love one another. But again, there is a time to hate sin. Okay?
I think we have to.
Right.
Exactly.
All right, so let's go to the next opposite.
Peace and war.
Time for war and a time for peace. As King Solomon did not leave out the political endeavors of his hearers, the same emotions that can give rise to love or hatred into individuals can give rise to war or peace into communities. So we just read this morning in today's reading about King Jehoshaphat. We find out he was not perfect, okay? He was a sinner, he was human just like us. But remember what happened. Israel and its allies came with this multitude to invade Judah and Jerusalem. And what does Jehoshaphat do? He cries out to the Lord. He has the people of Judah come before the Lord and sacrifice, and they call on God for protection. And God protected them. God destroyed the enemy. And again, we as believers may think, well, should we be out there actually killing somebody? But there may be a time when that's necessary.
It's especially difficult in Josiah's day because they were his brethren.
Right.
These were other Israelites.
Exactly. Right. But in Jehoshaphat's case, they were coming to destroy Jerusalem and Judah. Yeah. And God destroyed them.
And again, God has to intervene because if Judah is destroyed, the Messiah never is.
That's right. So, then again, I believe that Bible prophecy is not yet all fulfilled. So when we read Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, we know of another time, very similar to Jehoshaphat's situation, when Israel is going to be outnumbered, when the world with Gog and Magog and all of their allies is going to come against Israel, and God is going to defend them. Yeah, it's not the IDF that's going to have the victory. So,
We talked about that on Thursday with the men's fellowship about that psalm, was it 110?
110.
And the last part of that verse even talks about heads will be tossed all over the land. So Christ will fight.
Well, according to Scripture, it's going to take him 7 years to clean up all the mess that's left behind. When Jehoshaphat's time, it took him 3 days, was it, to go out and to just pick up the booty from this battle that took place. And so, anyway, remember what we said about Psalm 110. We had just covered that in our study of the book of Matthew, because Jesus uses this question against the Jewish leaders, you know, whose son is the Messiah. And then we said that Psalm 110 is the most quoted Old Testament passage in the New Testament.
I was just curious, do we have any idea why these enemy armies would come with so much booty, so much jewelry and all that kind of stuff? I mean, we read about it several times where the Israelites took a huge amount.
God.
Why would they even bring it?
Don't know. I do know that in those days, soldiers often used to decorate themselves. And so, yeah, they stripped the bodies, they stripped everything they could, and it took them 3 days, it says.
I think at that point, the invading army was so convinced they were going to win.
And also, it would be several months' time. You know, it wouldn't be just a couple of weeks that they were gone from home.
But sometimes God rewards his people. Look, when the Israelites finally got out of Egypt, what did they take with them?
Booty.
Lots of booty. So when they overcame this army that was charging against them, they had the booty right handy.
Well, I've often asked this question, but remember when we were going through the book of Exodus and we talked to building the tabernacle, we talked about all that goes into the tabernacle. Where in the middle of the Sinai desert did they go to get all this stuff? I mean, there was no Home Depot on the corner, all right? But they literally had carried all of this booty with them out of Egypt. And they had these materials, and God had already provided for that. So, all right.
Could be that God just allowed the pride of the enemies to be so full in their minds that they wanted to bring all their grandeur to express their pride.
To show off.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. Trying to, you said it better.
Well, they were outnumbered. Believe me, they were outnumbered. And again, Jehoshaphat, in this situation, does the right thing. Later on, he makes these weird political alliances with Ahab and builds ships, and the Lord goes ahead and sinks ships, you know. So, but again, it just proves that Jehoshaphat was human. just like you and I are. None of us are perfect, but by and large, he was a great king. Yeah, but he was known most of all for jumping Jehoshaphat. All right, would you read verses 9 to 15? We'll forgive you.
What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past.
Okay, so our God-given tasks, or our burden of work. And on the bottom of page 76 of your study guide, there's a little box there entitled Tools of the Trade. Would somebody read that for us?
Tools of trades, commonly in ancient Israel. King Solomon said that work doesn't gain the worker anything, and yet he also said that finding satisfaction in one's toil is a gift from God.
So I'm just looking at this, Mr. Sutherland, and I don't see any Makita tools.
I don't either. I was just going to say something.
Yeah, I don't see any power tools there at all.
No battery power.
No battery powered. Portion of a weighted net, a mallet, a knife, and an adze. So, If you've ever seen these guys work, everything they do is power nowadays. So, yeah. All right. Following the poem about God's timing, the seasons of life. And by the way, this section here reminds me, Patty, of a song that we just sung in our hymn book. In his time.
Okay.
In his time, he makes everything beautiful in his time. So, yeah.
Do we have that in the hymn book?
It's in the hymn book. We just sang it. Wasn't it last week?
Yep.
I think we just sang it last Sunday.
Oh,
Yeah. I think.
okay.
Before prayer and cheer time. I think.
You've already got your number for tonight, you see.
All right. So following the poem about God's timing and seasons of life, Solomon asked, what do workers gain from their toil? A modern paraphrase of this question might look like, my job seems boring and never ending. What do I get out of it? So we have 3 of our grandchildren who are working this summer between high school semesters out at the onion plant near Loudon. And our grandson Bart, who's very, very, very active, injured his shoulder at a wrestling match. So they put him on this job where he's up on a platform all by himself, and all he does is push a button all day. And this button makes boxes. Pushes the button, box. Pushes a button, box. Well, he does have his cell phone, but there's no place to plug it in, so he can't listen to music very long or anything. And so anyway, he has absolutely been bored out of his mind. But he was encouraged when he got his first paycheck. And he already went out and bought himself a mini refrigerator for his bedroom so that he can keep his own beverages cold in his bedroom.
So cute.
Yes. Okay.
His first check was
So anyway,
How much?
yeah. The teacher answered his own question by pondering further the nature of the human burden. The first part of the burden God has laid on the human race. It is that people are to attempt to determine on a daily basis where we fit into his plan. If we follow the great rhythm of God's timing described beautifully in the first 8 verses, then we will find meaning in the labors of life. We will discover, as a matter of fact, that his perfect plans is to do what?
Everything beautiful in its time.
And that's exactly what we saw just recently.
That's
All right.
that's what I sang to Kathy.
Yes, you did. You did. You did. and she didn't die immediately,
No, she didn't.
even though you sang to her.
I'm sure I hastened it.
She almost came out of her bed and punched you, but, oh my, anyway, no, it was very beautiful. No, Kathy really, for months, has wanted to go home to be with the Lord, but it was not yet his time. And so, anyway, Claude, the part of the problem was Kathy was praying one thing, Claude was praying the other. And, so, but anyway. All right, the second part of the burden God has put upon humanity is that he has done what? Set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. So again, even if you talk to atheists, they will be searching for some sort of meaning in life. Unfortunately, atheism leads to a meaninglessness. They say there is no hope. I mean, it's, in fact, believe it or not, the ultimate logical progression of atheism, if it is total materialism, is that we have no free will. Everything is just a set of mechanical things that happen no matter what. And basically we're all pre-programmed, and so who cares? And so, if you know the Lord, and we do believe that we do have a choice, and that we do affect our lives and our future, then we can find meaning in the Lord. We spend at least some time contemplating how our lives fit into God's eternal perspective, and this sets us apart from the animals. We do not live by only our instincts. There are different from ferrets and foxes because we attempt to understand through philosophy, theology, science, and ideology the full scape. I watched a video the other day of this guy who found this poor little baby beaver. And he took it home and he nursed it back to health. And he showed it affection, and the beaver loved the family. And so he actually let the beaver live in his house. He was horrified to see that the beaver was going around the house collecting everything he could to build dams. Now, who taught that to the beaver? It was part of his instinct. And so they were constantly having to get toys and other objects back from this beaver because he was collecting them and trying to build a dam in this guy's house. No water, but he was still trying to build a dam.
How about chewing on all the furniture?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Hey, you can chew a leg off furniture.
Oh my, well, we were over to my father-in-law's before he died, and he was very upset because he had an apple tree that he liked that was near the creek that goes through the family property. He went out one morning and the tree was laying on the ground. A beaver during the middle of the night had chewed it down and was going to drag the apple tree away to make a dam. Yeah. So, yeah, he killed his tree, killed it dead. So, yeah, in fact, my father-in-law is now deceased, so we can tell stories on him, but he would hire trappers to go out into the woods and trap beavers because they would make their little dams, and these little creeks would turn into ponds and would kill the trees. And he was a logger, and he didn't want his trees killed. And so, yeah, he actually would, it's probably not legal, but he would hire trappers to go out and trap some of these beavers.
It was legal.
Huh?
It was legal. My
Ah.
father-in-law has done that a
Yeah.
lot, yeah.
Yeah.
Even in the city of Bend. Except he had to be real careful about that because, you know, the rest of the people didn't like it, but the beavers were cutting down the trees next to the beautiful, Deschutes County, Deschutes River and all.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I was waiting for Trudy one day out in front of Wahai, and there's the Yellowhawk Creek, is that what it's called?
The thing.
It goes through Wahai. I'm standing on the bridge looking down at the creek, and here comes a beaver, swimming right down the creek, you know. So who knows what plants have been trimmed back at Wahai, so.
Leave it to Beaver.
Leave it to beaver. Oh, boy. I don't know about this. All right. The search only frustrates us, however, because in our finite minds and hearts, we constantly discover anew the whole picture of life on planet Earth eludes us. And again, we've talked about this many times, that for us to comprehend the universe, they say is infinite, for us to think about time as being infinite, our brains are limited. Okay, our brains are fantastic little computers, but they're limited to space and time, to spatial things that we can measure. And so yeah, it's very frustrating. Sometimes we just have to give up. Okay. Solomon explained his belief that even though humanity carries such a burden as it toils day in and day out, there is still much in life to enjoy. And according to verse 12, he wanted us to be happy and good while they live. And a little further down it says, by believing that such daily activity, indeed all of life itself is a gift of God. So what did Jesus say? I have come to give them life and make them all miserable, right?
And they might have it more
Abundantly, exactly. So yeah, God's purpose is not to spoil our fun or spoil our life, but to give us life, creative life.
We talked about that on the way in this morning, that if the most fun you can have is to go out on Saturday night and get snockered and have a hangover all day Sunday, well, look at us. We get to come, learn about God, enjoy our fellow brothers and sisters. What could be better?
Honestly, I've never been a drinker, but I simply do not understand what the excitement is of going out and getting drunk, knowing the next day that you're going to be sick as a dog. You know, people know that, and yet they go ahead and do it. So.
For that brief moment they do it.
Yes. The teacher must have recognized that we people can only believe that life is a gift of God when we humbly revere the Lord and place our confidence and faith in Him. We must realize the permanence of God's work and that nothing can be added to it and nothing can be taken from it. So we watched a video recently by Dr. James Tour, who's a brilliant scientist, a believer. And he made a statement that I had never really thought of before. There are no new molecules. All the molecules on planet Earth are the same molecules that God created originally. Now, they may rearrange themselves, but they're still the same molecules. We haven't created anything. We rearrange things. And we talk about how creative certain people are. You know, they can make beautiful furniture, they can paint beautiful paintings or whatever. They're only reorganizing what's God already created. And so we should be humbled by that. We don't make anything. In fact, one of the things that pet peeves is, he's challenged scientists who are non-believers to create life. In fact, he has even told them, I will give you the building blocks of life. I will give them to you. We figured out what these are. I'll give them to you. In your laboratory, you make life. They can't do it, even though we know what the building blocks are. Okay? All right. The teacher must have recognized that we people can only, okay, I read that. Nothing can be taken, nothing can be added. Again, Solomon then took a broader view of history as it affects people. In history, we can seek God's will further. In doing so, we begin to discover that history is more than just facts and events repeating themselves without meaning. Things do happen in certain patterns again and again, but with faith in God's sovereignty, we can learn from them in ways that will benefit a believer today. I was reading an article about Jonestown again, and Jim Jones. And unfortunately, and I don't know why, he had a big banner down there in Guyana that said, those who fail to learn from history
Are destined to repeat it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is so true of the human race. And what is interesting to me, I'm trying to get into politics, is that our culture is trying to destroy history. They're trying to rewrite history. They do not want us to learn from history because they want us to repeat. And again, there are certain things that have been tried throughout history that have failed over and over again. And yet those are the very things that they want to propose to us. But this time it's going to work. This time it's going to work. So, okay. We can also be certain that God will call the past to account. This may be both disturbing and comforting. It is disturbing in that it reminds us that we have not asked God to forgive our own wrongs against Him. He will hold them against us. It is comforting in that it means God will not overlook those who have suffered evil. So again, remember I mentioned to you that John Lennox has made presentations as a Christian apologist to atheistic groups, and he points to them and says, you do not believe in justice. And they keep saying, no, we're calling for justice. No, you don't believe in justice, because you believe that when people die, that's it. And think of how many people die without, in suffering, okay? They never experience any justice. And yet we as believers believe that someday God is going to execute justice. There will be justice in history. So that's interesting. And the final line of that section says, God will call the past to account. So there may be some great dictators and monsters in human history who seemingly have died without calling to account. But someday they're going to have to stand before the Lord. All right, let's please play verses 16 through 22, wondering about injustice and death.
And moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. I said in mine heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts, even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast. For all is vanity. All go unto one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth? Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him?
Okay. Naked we came into the world, and naked we're going to leave. Okay? Can't take anything with you, is that right? All right, Solomon continued his survey of vanity and meaninglessness, this time explaining or examining the courts of law. He pointed out that here was where people grasped for power rather than justice. And then they used that power to oppress others. As a result, wickedness reigned over the place of judgment instead of justice and compassion. Do you remember Jesus' parable about the unjust judge? And this lady goes to him, and she wants a resolution, and he doesn't want to deal with her, but she will not leave him alone. And finally, even though he knows he's unjust and could care less, he grants her justice. Why?
To get her shut up.
Yeah, just to get rid of her. Okay? And so basically Jesus is saying, if that's how an unjust judge is, what is God like? Because he does love, he does care, he does want to help us through all of this. All right. So rather than giving in to pessimism and despair, however, the teacher voiced some hope, referring to a higher court, the justice of God. He stated his belief that the Lord would judge both the righteous and the wicked. We've just talked about that in our overview of the book of Job. Remember? And again, Job had one view, his friends had another view as to why he was suffering. But they both very rightly indicated that God is just. Okay? And the wicked are going to have to pay for their wickedness. The righteous will be rewarded. And what they did not understand is that wasn't the issue with Job. Okay? It was a spiritual battle going on, and they didn't understand that. And so, anyway, Solomon's thoughts were turned to another test all people must face. The test is that awareness that we all must what?
Die.
Okay? And again, he compares us to the animal world. Further down it says, human bodies may be of a different shape than those of the animals, but the bodies of both are made of basically the same minerals and chemicals. And thus the fate of both is exactly the same. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. You heard about the little boy who was crying one night in bed, and his mother came in and asked him what he was crying about. He said he was afraid. Well, what are you afraid of? He said, well, in church this morning, it's what the pastor said. Well, what did the pastor say? the pastor said, well, from dust we have all come, to dust we shall return. There's somebody under my bed and I don't know if he's coming or going. So that's part of the problem of atheism, is that they believe that we're just animals. And we may be animals, hopefully of a higher intelligence level, although some people
That's
I know, yeah, that may be debatable. But yet, we know that there's something different. So if you go back to the book of Genesis, to the creation, we know that God created the animal world, but then he created Adam, and then created Eve. And he breathed the breath of life into them. And the word there is pneuma, which is the same for the spirit. And so mankind was created differently than the animals. Mankind is the only creature, if I can put it to you this way, in God's creation here on earth, that is meant for fellowship with God. So, all right. At the bottom it says, he then asked a startling question. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? Hebrew for spirit, here more literally translated breath of life. Essentially, if one perceives death only by what is observable, there is no demonstrable difference between the death of an animal and man. There's no qualifying a soul. Again, I do not know what the average Adventist believes who goes to their services. I do know what Ellen G. White taught. And she put into writing that man is merely a body, merely a soul. And that when you die, you cease to exist. Because the breath has gone out of you. And she believed that unless God were to bring the body back to life, you no longer exist. So they believe literally in this, when they call soul sleep, it's more than just sleep. It is a non-existence. They do not believe that we have a spirit or a soul. They believe that we're totally material. And that is not scriptural. Okay? Again, I don't know if your Adventist friends believe that or not. But that's what Ellen White taught. And it is definitely contrary to the scripture. The phrases rise upward and goes down into the earth highlight the distinction between humans and animals. Rises upward seems to imply that people have an afterlife that is dealt with by God. Goes down, on the other hand, seems to imply that animals cease to exist. Okay. So, we're almost out of time. So on page 79, there's an in brief section that covers chapter 4, verse 1 through 5:7. Would somebody read that for us?
Chapter 4 features a series of observations, proverbs, and parables offered by Solomon about issues such as oppression, envy, selfishness, and political intrigue. These topics appear to be loosely tied together around the theme of personal power and living selfishly for oneself. Ecclesiastes 5:1-7 provides an interlude in the teacher's quest for meaning. In contrast to the pursuit of power, we find a place of quiet worship, God's house. Solomon called his listeners to come there and seek deeper answers to the questions of life through worship and prayer and listening to God in silence.
Okay. So, we're almost out of time, but can you play verses 8 through 17 for us, please?
Chapter 4.
Verse
So
5.
I returned and considered all the...
Yeah, 8 through 17.
Chapter 5. Okay.
Oh boy, can you go to
I can do that. Verse
8? Yeah.
If thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter. For he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them, And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely, riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail, and he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. As he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? All his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath with his sickness.
Okay. I've quoted this before, but I'll quote it again because I think it goes right along with what Solomon's saying here. John D. Rockefeller, who was the patriarch of the entire Rockefeller clan, who was a billionaire in his day, so who knows how much he'd be worth today, was being interviewed by a reporter, and he said, "Mr. Rockefeller, how much money is enough?" And Rockefeller thought and said, "Just a little bit more." He was also on his yacht one day, and the reporter was very impressed, and he asked Rockefeller, "How much did this thing cost?" Rockefeller looked at him and said, "If you have to ask, you can't afford it." So, anyway, also the picture here of the poor laborer who's just getting by in life, works hard all day, but when he goes to bed at night, he goes to sleep. And yet the rich man who has all of this stuff that he's worried about can't sleep because he's worried about his riches. And then, of course, the statement, we come into this world naked, and we leave this world naked, and can't take anything with you. So, anyway, we're out of time, so next week we'll get further into Ecclesiastes.